OSRtober, Day 1. Rulings, not rules. Rulings, not rules is one of the most misunderstood principles of OSR and old school gaming. It does not mean do what you want. Instead, it's an opportunity for the referee to fill in the blanks. The general argument, the most common argument, is game systems cannot contain a rule for everything a player does. There is an infinite amount of activity that can occur in a role-playing type game. There is an unlimited number of directions or choices that a player may make that a referee will not have thought of in advance, and a rule system will not have covered in advance. As such, there is an acknowledgement that the rules aren't perfect, and they're not complete. By necessity, the referee is going to have to make something up to bridge the gaps. While true, this has led to a proliferation of rules-light games. Now, some rules-light games are fine. I'm not coming down on rules-light as an idea, but roll 2d6, adjudicate, $5 on my itch.io. That's not a game. That is you wasting my time and my $5. Grifting aside, it is important to bridge the gaps. And while some systems will have more gaps than others, it will really depend on the style of game that you run. If you're running a dungeon crawler that has dungeon crawling rules, there will be fewer gaps than if you take that same dungeon crawler and try to run ballroom intrigue. The deeper Zen moment, however, is recognition that this divorces the rules from your actions and their consequences. Is there a connection? Absolutely. However, look at the first edition Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. On the front page it says, this book is not for players. It makes a tongue-in-cheek remark regarding capital punishment for players that read the book. Now, to my knowledge, no one has ever actually gone through with that particular charge, but this taps in a somewhat satirical way to bringing your eyes off of the character sheet and into the world. It represents a separation of action from mechanic and consequence. Is there a connection? Absolutely, but the referee is the one who manages it. The players may know the mechanics at a glance. They should, really. Everyone should know how to roll to hit. Everyone should know what a hit point means, that kind of stuff. But the places where rulings apply are places where the player shouldn't be thinking about mechanics. This is liberation. This is freeing. This is the point where you stop looking at the character sheet and start thinking like you're in the world. This helps with immersion, this helps with creative problem solving, and this is why games played in this style get retold and retold at Waffle Houses around the country at 2 in the morning. To illustrate, I'm going to tell a quick story about running a group of RPG newbies, that is, people who had never played a tabletop game before, through a modified version of the introductory module in the back of one of my books. The party was shipwrecked and a storm was raging, so climbing out of the boat and seeking solace from the storm, they saw an ingress to a dungeon in the cliff face. Classic, start your players at the dungeon. So, after solving a quick riddle to get into the room, they were confronted with a trap. Before them was a foyer with 6 statues, armed, 5 of them with daggers. There was a pressure plate, unbeknownst to them, near the entrance, which, if depressed, would cause a statue to heave the dagger towards whomever was on the plate. The bravest among the party stepped forward. I rolled 2 and 6 chance to see if the trap went off. It did not, so I figured he just didn't step on the touch plate. He went up and investigated a bit around the statues took one of the daggers from the statue's hand and bragged about it. He was now armed. Second player steps up. Again, I roll to see if the track activates. This time, it did. According to the notes that I had put, I was supposed to roll randomly to determine which statue would try to throw the knife. Then, from there, proceed in a counterclockwise direction. I rolled and came up with the same statue that the first player had taken the dagger from. What do you do in this scenario? I didn't have it written down, so I just said, that one activates. It attempts to throw the dagger, but not having the dagger, its arm just makes a throwing motion. Startled the party pretty good, and they were very cautious to avoid the touch plate, jumping over it, shimmying around it very descriptively, and they pulled the daggers out of each of the hands of the statues. Then, to test their theory, one of them went over and, crouching, tapped the pressure plate aggressively, causing the other 4 statues still primed to discharge their throwing motions. So, not a single die was rolled, but a trap was bypassed and, for the purposes of our session, permanently disarmed. Should they have rolled a skill check, a thief percentile, to disarm or figure that out? Why? They figured it out themselves. Now, there's no need to roll because there's a predefined mechanism, and they figured out the mechanism and used it. If they had rolled their thief check, I would have let them figure it out on a success, of course, but other traps that don't work like that, the classic needle in the lock comes to mind. That's where you worry about the thief skill. That's where the rule comes into play. And instead, going to work the following week, one of my players talked up this experience aggressively with some of the other people who had tried out the D&D game at the time. They, trying out the newer editions, were flabbergasted. Their edition would have called for a skill check. What was described never would have happened. Their experiences were dice on the table, move through the room. Dice on the table, move through the room. And I'll specify I'm not coming down on their experience. They had fun playing different editions, and we had fun playing ours. But here I am, years later, telling this same story that the players still remember. Did they know I was going to let it work up front? Dunno. They just did what made sense, and it worked out for them. And that is the key. That is where the ruling versus the rule blends together, goes seamlessly, continues the game, pushes the game forward. That is the spirit of rulings over rules. The bridging of gaps, the covering of unforeseen situations in a manner that is invisible to the players and produces that memorable experience. Hopefully that's a fun story to have shared, and hopefully you have some stories just like it. Delve on, everybody. I'll talk to you tomorrow. OSRtober, Day 2. Player skill, not character abilities. While the discussion regarding what player skill is could fill an entire episode, and, in fact, I have an entire episode devoted to what is player skill, it's better illustrated with a story. So, I'm going to open it up with an experience from college. So, rewind a bit. It's 2005, 2006, somewhere in there, and I go up to the local friendly gaming shop to play in their D&D game night. Based on the time frame, it was right in the D20 boom. 3.5 was huge, and that's what they were running. And so I came in with my plate mail wearing, axe wielding fighter ready to go. Into the session, the party finds itself in a cavern system under and outside of town. We are after some MacGuffin, treasure, a hostage, who knows, I don't remember. But what I do remember is there was a 10-foot gap, a 10-foot chasm where we could not see the bottom. And it was between us and where we wanted to be. It was a confined space, 10 feet wide or 15 feet wide. So I asked the ref how tall the ceiling of the egress was that we were trying to get into, and he described it as low. Now, thinking with my player skill brain, a low ceiling means that I'm going to have a hard time jumping in. If I jump, I may hit the top, I may bump my head, I may fail to... I'm not going to be able to just simply jump across. So I started thinking, how can we get through without jumping? We could use pitons pounded into the wall. That might take some time. That would do some noise and alert whoever was on the other side. We could throw a ladder down. We didn't have a ladder. Those are kind of difficult to tote around. Alternatively, we could have gone back a bit and potentially dislodged a door from the entrance and then figured out how to use that as potentially a springboard, or tack two of them together and go across on a makeshift bridge. So as I'm thinking, a monk in the party, that player says, I jump across. The referee calls for a jump check. D20 is rolled. The result, 16. He clears it with room to spare. Color me stunned. There was no penalty. There was no mention of the roof. Nothing. It was simply roll and go. I had points in jump. Fighters only got 2 per level, and my intelligence was subpar, so I just had jump. Thought about swim, but if I'm wearing plate, that's not... and that, plate and swimming, that's all additions. But I roll my jump check, hit an 11, make it safe. Now, everyone in the party managed to do it, no problem. But the low ceiling served no purpose. The low ceiling was merely set dressing and had no impact on our procedure, on our game, or on the resolution of the task at hand. This may seem like I'm talking about the Ming vase problem. Because the 3.5 combat rules do not have rules for interacting with the environment around you incidentally, you could have a Ming vase stationed in the middle of 2 combatants and, played by the book, no matter what happened, those combatants would not knock the Ming vase over. That's not what I was trying to go with it, but instead I was trying to highlight what character skill means. Character skill means that I look at my reference sheet, I say this is what I can do, these are the buttons that I can push, and based on those buttons I'm going to determine my actions. There's a degree of character sheet everywhere. Bandit's Keep recently had a video where he said it's not that you don't want to look at the character sheet, it's that you're looking at the wrong place. Look in your inventory, look at your retainers and your other notes. Don't look for skills. And I'm not intending to throw shade on that referee. He was running the game in an official event, using the official rules, producing the official result. It was a tabletop skirmish game where we could move miniatures and look at the battle grid and all that fun stuff. But the memory wasn't there. But this ties back to the difference between the old school and the new school, the OSR and the modern day. The modern game imprisons you with the character sheet. You can do what is on your sheet, like a video game with buttons to push. Now, do you have to look at your character sheet? Of course not. You can always look beyond. However, the fact that those things exist trains new players to look first at your character skills, and veteran players, myself included, this was the beginning of what I call my wayward youth. will learn from people around them and conform to the play style that's promoted by the rules. If I can roll a die and the situation is resolved compared to thinking about it, if my eyes are set on the prize, I'm just going to take the easiest way to get to that prize and get out because I want my character to survive and be safe. That prison, however, requires the referee to think in advance of what is going on, where all of this stuff is, and it takes away so many cool things in the story, so many cool experiences that you could recap later. When I write a module for an OSR group, I don't think of a solution. I present a problem the way that the problem would present itself, or a trap the way that a trap builder would try to kill somebody, and then I let the party deal with it. It's not my role as the ref to solve that problem. Problem solving is one of the big fun parts of the game. Why would I take that away from my players? To conclude, by realizing that the answer is not on the character sheet, but instead in your mind, that provides freedom. That is the liberty I talked about yesterday. It's the freedom for the player to solve the problem at hand, and it's the freedom of the referee to throw impossible situations at their players and then watch in amazement as they figure out a way through. And that's my story for today. Thinking it's a bit of a downer, but really not so much, because it turned out okay at the end. And between now and when I talk to you tomorrow, keep an eye out for those chasms and ways you can get around them that don't involve rolling a jump. OSRtober. Day 3. Heroic, not superheroic. The principle of this Zen moment is that you are a common man at first, and you become uncommon, but you never turn into Superman. You're always still mortal. I think I agree. I definitely agree with the principle on this one, but I do think I would have phrased it a little differently. Less heroic, not superheroic, and more protagonist, not heroic. And what do I mean by that? The story that is being written during old school play is about the world and about the party. It is not about any individual character. Plenty of old school referees will have multiple players with multiple characters each. Plenty of other old school referees will have a 1-to-1 player to character ratio. However, a common theme in all OSR systems is that it's easy to get killed and hard to come back, but easy to re-roll and catch up. In that sense, your character is expendable, and the important part is that the overall game survives. The campaign will continue, the story will continue, even if there's a total party wipe. To that end, you are the protagonist of the story today, but you don't have any plot armor, and you probably shouldn't try to strangle a dragon with your bare hands, regardless of your level of achievement to that point. Coming up with a story for this one was a little challenging, because most of the refs that I play with have a 1-to-1 character to player character ratio, and when I play, I tend to die early or late. There's not a lot in the middle. That said, I do have a good one, and it's from recent vintage. I will give a shout out to my buddy Jason Hobbs over at the Gamerhood and his Kalmata game. Starting in 2020 in Kalmata, I took on the mantle of Azarus, the Argonaut acolyte in the service of Arkan Aminar, one of Hobbes' pantheon and the source of much alliteration on my part. I played him for a year and a half, 2 years, until somewhat recently he was 10-20 XP, within a hair's breadth or a prime requisite boost of reaching level 5, one of the highest level, if not the highest level, clerics on the island in this sandbox. But then, disaster struck. A poor roll, even with some GM fiat. Hobbs was going to cut me some slack, but the roll was just too terrible. I failed a save versus petrification, and Azarus was turned to stone. While the party did come out victorious in the end, they defeated the basilisk and walked away with veritable hoards of gold and treasure. I and one of the other long-timers in the game had suffered a stony fate. The party did vow to find a way to bring us back to flesh, as stone is not truly the end, but until then, I'm going to have to roll up an alt. Despite being a regular on the game for a long time, and despite being one of the higher level player characters, a honor that very few make it that far in a BX based game, the show was never about Azarus. The show was never about Baggio Gar, the actual most powerful character in Kalmata, the wizard who saved the day and defeated the basilisk at the end. And I wouldn't want it to be. I wouldn't want it to be the Baggio show. I wouldn't want it to be the Azarus show. I would want it to be the Kalmata show. More people, more players, more variety, different approaches, and different strategies. It all adds to a cumulative experience that drives the game, drives the setting in a direction that it wouldn't have gone with just one or two people guiding the show. Similarly, by rolling an alt or by playing multiple characters, it allows an individual player to rotate the roles. So I played a cleric. I enjoy playing a cleric, but most of the time I like to play a fighter. My default go-to is usually a lawful neutral fighter, going with that new school 9-point alignment system instead of the classic 3, trying to speak to my younger audience. If the show is about me, and if the campaign is one player to one character, that means I have to pick which one I'm going to play. That naturally puts a dampener on the campaign. I'm only going to play so long as I'm interested in a cleric, and then I'm going to move on. I'm only going to play so long as I'm interested in a fighter, and then I move on. Different characters grow organically in these kind of games, so Azarus started out with a hammer and shield and wound up wielding a staff, a magic staff that endeared him to the Lords of Law, a forgotten lawful entity behind the new gods. Not all clerics go that direction. Not all clerics that would be played by me go that direction. One of the alts that I was able to play in the meantime, another cleric, she was using a totally different weapon set. She went with a different background and a different deity, different roleplay opportunities, and admittedly, she exploded when she set off a fire trap. I tend to die early or late, but that's not the point. It was by having multiple characters, it allows and empowers the player to explore avenues of the game within the same campaign that they wouldn't be able to normally. And for players who get bored or who just want to experience something different and flesh out their exposure to different mechanics and different perspectives in the game, or for you theatric types who like to expand on and develop character personalities, that's an opportunity to do that. It's a gift, again, to the players. It's a way to encourage that kind of thing, to draw interest in the campaign and to build out a fully fleshed setting and home milieu. How many protagonists are you running in your games? How many games are you playing in? Let me know. I'll do call-ins eventually, but for the time being, this entry for OSRtober is in the books and on the sheets, and between now and when I talk to you tomorrow, delve on. OSRtober, Day 4. forget game balance. This is arguably my favorite precept of old school gaming, in that it is an opportunity for the game to mirror the fiction regardless of the incarnation that you use. It makes sense to flee from something that's too big. Conan encounters and flees from things that are too big. Look at the Scarlet Citadel. When he's imprisoned under the tower of Sothalanti, he runs into this gibbering horror thing while he's in the dark under the tower and has to back away. He chooses not to engage. Similarly, Bilbo does not fight Smaug. Bilbo hides from Smaug. He tells him riddles and he stays out of sight because he knows Smaug is way too big for him. The same could be said of the trolls. The dwarves are taken prisoner by the trolls because they don't stand a chance. The wilderness does not care that they are level 1. The wilderness is what it is. If I am on safari in Africa, I am not going to be attacked by prairie dogs until I get my bearings and work my way up to having to fend off hyena. No, there's going to be lions, there's going to be cheetahs, there's going to be hyenas, all right off the cuff, because that's where they live. That's how the ecology works. Similarly, if I'm in the wilderness of New Hampshire, the worst thing that I'm going to run into is a libertarian. I'm not going to, despite my mastery of the katana, run into a group of Ronin who intend to challenge me to a duel. The environment is what the environment is in old school games, and it makes no apologies accordingly. Game balance, while not unique to video games, is frequently considered the purview of video games. My favorite computer RPG of all time, The Elder Scrolls III: Morrowind, is criticized for its level scaling or absence thereof. If you travel to the swamp to the southeast, you're going to run into critters that are, I want to say low to mid-level. Or if you travel to the plains to the northeast, you're going to get smeared unless you are super high level and have some powerful gear. The game doesn't care. The environment is what the environment is, and you, the player, are responsible for figuring out where you're going to go. Sometimes on the map, when it says, "Here be dragons," there be dragons. Now, you're saying, in Morrowind, if you hang out in the swamp to the southwest for a while, that's pretty level appropriate, right? Yes, it is. That's because it's a low-level environment. The key here is that it does not change according to your player level. It changes according to what makes sense for the world around it. In the same sense, old school D&D is vaguely balanced. As first level characters in the first level of the dungeon, you're going to run into 1-hit die monsters more frequently than you run into anything else. Similarly, on a third level, you're going to expect to see 3-hit die creatures. Now, there may be 6-hit dice on the first level in the first room. That can happen. It typically doesn't. But there are challenges in the dungeon that are going to be bigger than your party is. This is a feature. Its purpose is to encourage thinking outside the box and non-combat solutions. From the referee's perspective, it gives you an opportunity to figure out why that creature is where it is. Why is there an ogre hanging out with half-hit die kobolds? Maybe he was exiled from his tribe. Maybe he's secretly something else in disguise. This is an opportunity for you as the referee to create an underlying dynamic which the players will have to figure out or get splattered by the creature that is clearly out of their league. When has this come up in campaign? Well, the best example is probably the time that I played in a buddy's college game, the first game outside the shop that I played as a player with a friend of mine running his custom milieu. I was playing the cleric, of course, coming off as a broken fiddle at this point, and we were exploring a city of ash, a sort of dead place that was shrouded in this smog and soot. We were 4th or 5th level. I think the leader of our party was 6th level. He was our toughest fellow, at least, playing a ranger. While we were in the city, we ran into a dragon, an ash ghost dragon. It materialized out of the dust. It came out in a very well read and well box text on the part of the referee, and we rolled our initiative. Playing the support character, I kind of stood up with the intent to be support. I was well armored, but not particularly well suited to tank. Our level 6 glorious leader was up next in the order. He fled. He turned around and just hightailed it out of there. And this was a shock to me, because it's like, we're like 5th, 6th level. We can take on a dragon. What are you doing? But he saw what he saw. He did what he did, and the party broke with him, and we bolted, fleeing this dragon creature. Now, he knew something that I didn't. He perceived something that I didn't. He saw that creature, he thought about, okay, what do I expect to see in this environment? And he judged, this just isn't for us. Now, in his shoes, I probably would have given it a round or two, but getting away up front is probably a little bit of a more guaranteed way to escape. In that sense, we had no fatalities, we didn't kill the dragon either, and my character would eventually have visions that were granted by said dragon. That's another story for another time. Maybe I'll have that referee come on the show. He's still a buddy of mine. But we're neither here nor there. Instead, we walked away with our lives in our hands, and I was able to tell you the story of the day that cowardice saved. Have you run away from a creature intentionally before? Have you overcome a creature through trickery, riddles, or otherwise? You might just be playing OSR. That's all I got today. So, between now and tomorrow, delve on. The Clear Square Ring Mail Podcast is an independently owned and operated product released for educational and informative purposes under the Totally Steal This license, which is kind of like Creative Commons, except licensing. Segments recorded within a vehicle are recorded using a Bluetooth hands-free device in conjunction with local vehicular safety legislation. Theme music for the Clear Square Ring Mail Podcast is Gold Coffee by Michael Rainier C., retrieved from Mixkit.co and used under the Mixkit royalty-free music license. Sound effects used in the Clear Square Ring Mail Podcast are also retrieved from Mixkit.co and used in accordance with the Mixkit free sound effects license. Clear Square Ring Mail does not ascribe to nor endorse views or opinions expressed by call-ins, guests, or even the host, unless you think they're awesome, and thus does not assume any liability regarding the consumption or distribution of this podcast. By listening to the Clear Square Ring Mail Podcast, you agree to these provided terms. Parties with questions regarding these terms, conditions, or releases are encouraged to reach out to Clear Square Ring Mail at the prescribed methods provided on the Clear Square Ring Mail blog. Parties dissatisfied with these terms, conditions, or releases are encouraged to go suck an egg.